I think I'll just say one more time what a fantastic job that Brendan McCall and the cast did in pulling this together. If I would have had a cast like this when I was mayor, I'd be meeting with Putin today. So anyway, so let me give you a little bit of a thought on this. America is going through interesting times, and that's what Tom McEnery, I think, saw particularly in this when it was premiered downtown last year. He saw the aspects of uncertainty, of how people are very fearful. There's a lot of economic exigencies, I guess you would say. There's a lot of disparities, but most of all, there's a lack of faith in institutions, and that's exactly what was present. And I think the cast did a hell of a job of bringing out just the uncertainties that people felt, what they thought with a new, inexperienced president. And remember, the Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the FDR that we know now that led us through World War II and was elected 4 times, he was just into office a couple of months. People didn't trust him. They were uncertain. They were scared. So that's what I think Tom McEnery really saw in this. And as we worked on the script and worked a few extra things into it from that first premiere, it's no big surprise to anybody here that we're all tremendous fans of his. And what was done here tonight, I think, is a pretty significant tribute to him. So that's how we saw this. How the whole thing started is Harry Farrell's book, and I know a lot of you have read that. But this was a totally hidden part of San Jose history that would be mentioned, but really not spoken of too much. The Hart family themselves, I knew Alex Hart, the boy in the play, pretty well. He died several years ago, and the sisters, Miriam and Elise, died not too awfully long ago. But they wouldn't allow pictures of Brooke in the house. Everybody deals with grief of this kind, this tremendous kind, in different ways. But what I think we all saw as we were redoing this play, and as I hope you saw it this evening, is that what's remarkable here is the resilience of the Hart family, the courage they showed, the way they went right back to work, which is kind of the tradition in this valley. It's a very American tradition. They went back to work, they fought the fight, they put one foot ahead of the other, and they continued. And to me, it's not a story really of kidnapping and an awful lynching. That's part of it, but the real story is what I just said. It's how people persevere and pull through in this. The fellow who wrote the book, as most of you know, was Harry Farrell. He was a longtime political editor at the Mercury. In ancient times, he actually covered me for a year or two. But he always used to say that, he'd written a few other books. When he was speaking to an audience, you'd often have people, and we're going to open it up to questions as we promised. You often have people in the audience that, they think they know more about the subject. Harry would say, in a lot of these forums I'd be in, Tom, not only did they know more, there was actually a few people that were in the mob that were actually there. They didn't speak too much, but, they knew an awful lot. But, San Jose is like, I think it's like every place this valley. You scratch the surface and it's, I said to somebody last night, it's like 3 degrees of separation from Jerry Wade, Everybody's connected in some way. Tomorrow night, Rabbi Judge Karish's son will be here. He's a judge in San Mateo. The Hart grandchildren were here in the premiere downtown. I didn't know they were there, and then I talked to them later. Their names are Brooke, Leopold. The continuity is very much there. But you scratch the surface in a community, and there's so many connections. One thing, maybe I'll preclude one question here. People always ask, well, why did this just disappear? Why did nobody ever speak of this? Well, there was a conspiracy that evening. There was a conspiracy then of silence after. The Mercury News destroyed the records. The police department clearly abdicated, and the sheriff's department any responsibility that night. But the numbers that they were talking about was so well portrayed in that last very powerful scene. No exaggeration, you had 8 to 12, 15,000 people here. So it'd be the equivalent of having 150,000 people showing up anywhere. Think, 18,000 people go to a Shark game. if you had 150,000 people showing up, that's the kind of magnitude of event that happened there. And the other aspect that I think can't be forgotten is that, you know, this was the middle of the Depression. And a question and an answer that always sticks in my mind that I think it was in the book, or I might have got it just talking to Harry, is that they asked Franklin Roosevelt in these few months when he was first elected, you know, fascism was on the march in Europe, and millions of people were out of work, 5,000 banks had closed, and they said, you know, Mr. President, do you think you're going to be able to solve these problems? And if you do, will you go down as a great president? And he said a line that really sticks in my mind. He said, I don't know, but if I don't solve them, I may well be the last president. And that's the kind of times that were happening there. And then you were into the end of the Depression, you were into World War II. You know, 7 million people were in uniform, 60 million people died around the globe. So somehow what happened in a park with 2 men being lynched and a horrible murder before it, it just drifted away. They wanted it to happen. The authorities wanted it to happen. The boss was Louis O'Neill. There was another boss at the city. Remember, when they talk about, I think some of you know this, Old City Hall and the jail were right in the middle of Cesar Chavez Plaza. And where the Fairmont Hotel is now is where Thurman was apprehended on the telephone. He was making the phone call right across the street. You all know where the St. Clair Hotel is. That's where the FBI was set up, and that's where, you know, J.Edgar Hoover, I think, probably showed a few foreshadowing of his future nose for getting publicity and nose for, you know, getting out of situations where he thought it would lend some embarrassment. But clearly, bringing them back from San Francisco, and the chief of detectives in San Francisco was a guy named Charlie DeLay, whose son was president of Bellarmine for a while. There's another 3 degrees of Jerry Wade separation. So bringing them back to San Jose, just as Brendan and the cast displayed, was they clearly knew what almost certainly was going to happen. And when Louis Rossi, who worked for the Hearts for 20 years, he worked for my dad at the Farmers Union for 25 years too. He delivered the message, something's going to happen at 11. Well, they sent police officers home. They only had 2 guys there, and they made them take their guns upstairs and lock them in a drawer. They had tear gas. It was clear that the powers that be, all the way up to the governor, wanted what happened to happen. It was a very successful book. It got a lot of mystery awards when Harry Farrell wrote it in '92. And you know, again, this would be buried very deeply without the work he did. He interviewed the children of Holmes, and he interviewed the former wives and girlfriends and things. He really he interviewed Alex Hart. I've listened to that tape, which is crushing. I guess a lot of people ask themselves when they're, you know, get a chance to be a good Samaritan, or you know, they see something happening, how would you have acted? I don't think you ever know. You know, I don't think you ever know individually. You like to think you do the correct thing. But what we did see, and Karish is really the linchpin of all of this. As the rabbi, you know, he died in 1996. So the fact that he was involved in all these things that would be familiar to so many of you here, the Patty Hearst trial, Huey Newton calling him a renegade Jew and a cracker, the zebra killings which terrorized San Francisco. The fact that this was the same guy who at 26 was the rabbi to the Hart family. And that Hart mansion that you saw behind you was right where the YMCA is now. So I know how he acted in my mind. Obviously, I'd never had a chance to interview him. I've talked to his son many times, and some of those quotes that Brendan used in the play and that Tom Alessandri used were direct quotes that the son gave me in different articles and things. But none of us know how we'd react. You know, I like to think that most people would react and have that kind of epiphany, that moment that the rabbi did, and turn his whole life around. But you're pretty young. Maybe you'll have one of those moments. You know? After Tom died, I was on the email string with Brendan and a lot of people who I'd never met, talking about Tom, the impact he'd had on their life, and in the most tragic of ways, so much reminded me of what the Hart family went through and what their different reactions were. That email string and the things they said about how Tom had changed their lives, you know, how he'd made impacts of them, not just helping them in acting, but I know Judy, his wife, is here, and his daughters gave some His daughter Marin is one of the key people putting this thing together, and his little granddaughter was here. You know, I think a good way maybe to end this night is that, you know, if anybody would say 10% of the things about you or any of us that they said about Tom, that you all said about him, you know, you'd think you had a life very well lived. So I think that's another message I take away from this. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Brenda. Thanks a lot.